Hi, I'm Mark from Sounds in Sync. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how EdiLoad can conform or assemble location WAV files to match the audio in a picture edit. In a nutshell, EdiLoad performs this task with the help of the Pro Tools field recorder functions. It loads the edit data from the audio tracks of the picture edit system and exports this as a Pro Tools session containing conform reference tracks. This session is then opened in Pro Tools, where its field recorder functions use the edit data contained within the EdiLoad clips to conform or assemble all tracks of the original location WAV files. In case you want to skip ahead, I'm going to discuss why you would want to conform your location WAV files, the requirements for conforming, an EdiLoad, loading a set of EDLs, checking the edit data is correct, cleaning the list and exporting conform reference tracks, then in Pro Tools setting up the field recorder functions, and expanding the conform reference tracks to conform the rushes. And lastly, I'm going to discuss one of the conform problems you can have where your location WAV files are up to one frame out of sync. So here I have an AEF of a feature film, and I'm just going to go through some of the reasons why you might want to conform your location WAV files. At this point here, you can see we've got channel information for these clips, but these ones up here, we don't. So by conforming the original location WAVs, we'll get the channel metadata exactly as the sound recordist had entered it. Also, with this AEF, you're restricted to 10-second handles. So by conforming, it would be great to be able to get access to the full length of those original WAV files. And in this particular AEF, as you can see, the editor or assistant has laid up most of the tracks, but you're not quite sure if all of the original channels are in this AEF. So by doing the conform yourself, you can at least be assured that all tracks or channels that were recorded on location will be available to the dialogue editor or dubbing mixer. Another advantage of doing a conform yourself would be that then you're actually using the original location WAV files rather than some processed version that went via a picture edit system to be able to bring them into an AEF back to you. And on top of that, by doing the expand in Pro Tools, you're able to play the original poly-WAV files, unlike some conform systems that need to split poly-WAV files into multiple mono files. So you might say, well, why don't we just conform or expand using the edit data that's stored within this AEF? Well, in this particular instance, it would actually be quite tricky because you'd have to expand all these A1 clips. Then you would have to expand, say, this clip here on track 6, and this one on 6, and this one on track 5. So this is one of the advantages of using EdiLoad, is that EdiLoad will get all this information from the picture edit system via EDLs, and then it's a very simple process to clean the edit list data and remove these duplicate events. So what EdiLoad presents to Pro Tools to expand is actually just one set of these clips that you expand and retrieve all the original channels that were recorded. So another reason to conform with EdiLoad and Pro Tools would be if you're handed an OMF, and of course an OMF doesn't contain the metadata required to be able to expand tracks in Pro Tools, or if for some reason a picture editing system can't export a OMF or AEF successfully and it can export EDLs, then of course EdiLoad partnered with Pro Tools would be the perfect solution. So what you'll need to be able to conform your location WAV files with EdiLoad and Pro Tools is a license for EdiLoad version 3. Then you also need, of course, a license for Pro Tools, but it needs to be HD so that you have access to the field recorder guide track functions here with all these menus. You'll also need an EDL or a set of EDLs from the picture editing system. There's a couple of things to note. EDLs can only contain up to 4 tracks, so you'll most likely need a set of EDLs where the first EDL is tracks 1 to 4, the second EDL is tracks 5 to 8, etc. until you have enough EDLs to cover all the tracks that use the location audio in the picture edit tracks. The second thing to note is that the EDL role name will need to match the sound role metadata stored within the location WAV files. If that isn't possible, this new version of EdiLoad can also link to the WAV files by the WAV file name. So just have a look inside the EdiLoad user guide for a full spec on what's required for these EDLs. And lastly, of course, you'll need a folder containing all of the original location WAV files from the sound recordist. So here are the EDLs we received from Editorial for this 3-reel film. Actually, I'll show you in Pro Tools. We've just got 3 very long reels. First one's 31 minutes, 35, and 49 minutes. So we've got 3 sets of EDLs. For reel 1, we've got an EDL containing the tracks 1 to 4, the second tracks 5 to 8, and the third tracks 9 to 12. And the same again for reels 2 and reel 3. So what we want to do is load all of these EDLs into EdiLoad so we can manipulate all of those edits in the one hit. To do that, we first load the reel 1 tracks 1 to 4 EDL. Then we'll append tracks 5 to 8. We just do that by drag and dropping that EDL onto EdiLoad and select append. Then we'll append by tracks. Do the same for the track 9 to 12 EDL. And then what we're going to do is export that. We're not going to renumber the events. We're just going to export that as an EDL. And we're going to come back to that later. Now we'll do the same for the reel 2 EDLs. Append the track 5 to 8 by tracks. And 9 to 12. Export that as an EDL. Save that as reel 2. And now we'll clear that and do the same for reel 3. And export that. It's reel 3 EDL. Now the reason I export them as EDLs, these combined lists, is now we can first load the reel 1 EDL, then we can load the reel 2 EDL, and this time we'll select append, but now we'll go append by time, so that we'll get reel 1 and then appending reel 2. We don't need to offset those time codes that are coming in because they already start at 2 hours. And we'll do the same for the reel 3, appending that one by time. So now we have all of the events, 2,737 events for tracks 1 to 12 for all 3 reels, approximately 2 hours worth of feature film. So what I'm going to do now is just save this. I'm going to save this as and I'm just going to call this role name dirty one. This is still a dirty EDL, and that's this list here that's been saved. Now, in case your EDLs have got a vision track in them, a video track, it would be listed as a V, and you'd see a V up here as one of the columns. A very quick way to delete that in EdiLoad is to just select the track you don't want in the filter by track list and hit the delete key, and then you can just delete them. We don't have any vision tracks in here, so we don't need to do any of that. So here we have all the edits that we imported from those 12 EDL files. What we need to do now is to delete the role names that don't apply to location audio footage, like temp effects, temp voiceover, temp music, that kind of thing. And we also need to check that this data stored within this EDL file will link to your original location WAV files. The easiest way to do that is to use one of these two windows, new with EdiLoad version 3.3. There's a check role names for Conform window and the check file names for Conform window. We're going to have a look at the check role names window for starters. So here on the left hand side we have listed all the role names that are stored within the EDL. What we're going to do here is drop on the folder that contains all of the original location WAV files. And what EdiLoad's done here is it's extracted all the sound role names out of the metadata of each WAV file and listed them all here. So now we can see what's going to link and what isn't. So for starters, all the red ones here on the left hand side are temp effects, etc. that don't relate to the location WAVs. So we're just going to delete them. The easiest way to do that is just select them here in the filter by role list. And all I'm doing is just selecting them. Oops, select the first one, hold down the shift, select the last one and pressing delete on the keyboard. And then we've got this last range here. We'll just delete them. So now we have these green edit list role names which match exactly to the sound role names, but we've got these ones here in orange which don't match exactly. And the reason for that is EDLs aren't allowed to contain a space character within the role name. Now what I'm going to do first is just save this list. We'll call it 32 because we want to come back to this point. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways that we can amend this within EdiLoad, so you can choose the best one that suits you for what you need to do. So the first thing we need to do is set the EDL save format to no format, and this will allow us to enter a space character in this role name. The first approach would be to open up the role name batch update window, and here you can just select the role name, update what you need, click update. So I'll just do day 13 here so you can see it updating in the edit list. The second approach is to open up the column transfer window. This is a very powerful tool to be able to extract information from different columns or from the clip name column and paste them into the role name column. But I've already got set up here that will extract data from the role name, paste it back into the role name, and what we'll do with it is replace day underscore with day space. And then we'll just hit transfer all events, and hey presto, all of our edit list role names now match exactly with the sound role names. And the third approach I'll do is I'll just go back to what we had before. The easiest way to be able to fix this is just to click the auto update role names button. It just tells you here what it's going to do. Click yes. And now the data contained within this edit list will link correctly to the location WAV files. So here you'll see all the events are shown in green, and there's also a confirmation down here saying 2,588 events are all matched. Okay, so from here I'm just going to save this again. We'll just call this 33. Because what I want to show you now is this other match window. And to do that, I'll bring in this EDL. So this EDL is slightly different from the previous ones in that not only do we have the sound role name, but we've also got the WAV file name in the comments. So if for some reason you don't have the sound role metadata in the picture edit system, you should be able to link with the file name if that can be exported in the EDL. So I'll just drag and drop this EDL. Now this EDL has already had all of those 12 separate EDLs merged together, and it's also been cleaned, which you'll see in the next step. So here I'll just show you the check file names for Conform window. And with this window we see listed on the left column all the WAV file names from the edit list. And when we drop the original audio files on, we see the file names of those files instead of the role names. But here again, not all of these file names are matching. Now the reason for this is that EDL files can only contain uppercase characters. But unfortunately, some of these WAV files have got lowercase extensions. Now the Pro Tools match criteria will only match file names with the same case. So what we need to do is update the relevant files in this edit list to have the correct case. The way to do that is to click the Auto Update File Names button. So now we see all these file names have successfully matched, and in the edit list we see the file names have a combination of upper and lowercase extensions. So now they will link correctly in Pro Tools when we expand tracks. Because this edit list actually contains valid role names as well, I can open up the role names for Conform window, drop the original audio on that, And now we see we have this problem again with the underscores. I can just click auto update. And now we have matching role names and file names. So in Pro Tools, we can use either way to link these events to the original location WAV files. I'm going to open up the edit list that we created before. So this is the list that we created by loading and appending the 12 EDL files, then deleting the role names that didn't apply to the location audio files, and then fixing these role names here using the match role names window to remove the underscores and replace it with spaces. So the last thing we need to do in EdiLoad is clean this list. So as you can see here, this event has an assignment on tracks 1, 2 and 3. We don't want to conform this, otherwise we'll get 3 duplicates of the same thing. Also, we've got events here spread over 12 tracks, and so we don't want to have 12 sets of conformed rushes. And EdiLoad down here is telling you that the list isn't clean. And a simple way to clean this in EdiLoad is just go to the List menu, select the first option, which will combine split track events, remove dupe audio tracks, and ripple all tracks to the lowest event. So we'll just do that now. And here it's removed 820 events, turning the 12 tracks into 5. So most of the events will be rippled down to track 1. And we can see here there's only 2 events on 5, etc. So from here, all we need to do is export this edit list as conform reference tracks. We'll just do that from the export menu. And here, we'll just set this session to start at 58 minutes, 48K 24-bit, and press OK. Now I'll just save this next to the source edit list. Hit save. And now it's generating a WAV file for each event in this edit list, storing the metadata required within each file. And it's saving that here next to the source list. Okay, so we just got a message here what to set up in Pro Tools, which we'll go through shortly. So from here, we can see we've got our conform reference session and all the mute files that it's generated with the correct metadata inside it. So before we can import this Pro Tools session into another session, we first have to open it up in Pro Tools. And here we can see our 5 conform reference tracks. And we're just going to hit save. Now if you don't save the EdiLoad session in Pro Tools first, and you import it into a new session, you'll get a whole range of errors depending on the version of Pro Tools that you're running. So now we'll set up Pro Tools ready to conform these tracks. So here is the session we saw before containing the 3 reels for our movie. It's got a movie track and 2 guide tracks. And what we're going to do is import the Pro Tools session that EdiLoad generated, and we also saved in Pro Tools. And we're going to import the 5 conform reference tracks linking the source media. So here's all the clips that EdiLoad generated. I'm just going to quickly show you each of these clips here are named with the role name and then the clip name. By having the role name here, it can be a handy reference to be able to locate the folder that contains the location WAV files in order to find alternate takes. But anyway, let's set up this session to be able to expand the tracks. So the first thing we're going to do is select all those tracks, hold Shift and Option, right click, and select Field Recorder Guide Track. That now sets up all of these tracks as Field Recorder Guide Tracks, and that then sets up the menu to show these 3 extra options. We're going to select the first one here, Field Recorder Channels Match Criteria. And in this window, I'm just going to option click one of these to deselect all of them. We're going to select sound role name and first 99 characters in file name. Now this particular conform actually only has valid sound role names. We didn't have any file names set in that edit list, but we're just going to select both. So just in case the next job you're matching by file names, we'll have that set up ready. And the last thing we're going to do here is set the name and sort tracks by to channel number, and that will generate the least number of tracks. So we'll just close that window. And then we've got one more thing to set up here, is the select areas to search option here. And what this does is it tells Pro Tools where to find your location WAV files. Just hit the plus button, and here is our original audio folder that we saw before when we dropped it onto EdiLoad. Contains all of our subfolders of rushes. We'll just click Save and Index. Now, one thing to note about that setup is we've had a few EdiLoad clients tell us that that doesn't always work. So if Pro Tools doesn't actually find the location files when you go to expand, which we'll see shortly, you'll just need to open up the clip list and drag and drop all of your location audio files onto the clip list so that Pro Tools can find them. Just note that if you're going to do this, remember to set the preference to tell Pro Tools not to copy everything that it imports so you don't get a duplicate of all your location WAV files. But hopefully Pro Tools will find everything through the select areas to search menu, and we'll all be set up ready to go. So now that we've got Pro Tools all ready to expand these conform reference tracks, all we need to do is select expand channels to new tracks and select by match criteria. Now we're actually going to skip ahead a bit here because this takes Pro Tools about 80-90 seconds to process. So here Pro Tools has expanded this first conform reference track. Now the first thing we're going to need to do here is delete all of these tracks. Now these are actually clips that Pro Tools has generated, and what it's done here is it's matched the media that EdiLoad generated with these dummy WAV files, and it's refound them again. Now unfortunately in Pro Tools you can't tell it to not look in the clip list, but the handy thing is all you need to do is look for any track that's got a -A0 in it. So all these ones here are actually mute WAV files that we can just delete. So we'll delete the clips, delete the tracks, and then we've got a track A10. We'll just drag down here, and what I'll do is I'll just enable those tracks. I've just disabled the conform reference track so we can see exactly where our audio tracks are. So next thing we do is we just repeat the same process. And again, first thing we'll do is we'll just get rid of all these -A0 tracks. And then I'll enable the tracks with the actual location audio files on them. So then we'll expand the third conform reference track and conform the last one by match criteria. Okay, so I can just get rid of those -A0s, track delete, track make active. Okay, so here you can see we have all the channels that were recorded on location now conformed for this whole feature film. So if we have a closer look, we can see now we'll just have to go view clip channel name, and now we can see we've got all the metadata that was set by the sound recordist available to us in Pro Tools. Also now you can see we're not restricted to 10-second handles. Here we've got a 3-minute WAV file, but the best thing of all is at least you know now that you're playing the original poly location WAV files here, which haven't been processed or transferred at all. So that's how you go about conforming your location WAV files using EdiLoad and the Pro Tools field recorder functions. One problem that you can have when you conform your location WAV files is that it can look like some of the clips are up to 1 frame out of sync. And this problem can occur with any conforming system, or if you just expand tracks from an AEF. So I'm just going to show you a couple of clips in this film. And the handy thing about this film was that it was shot in 2 completely different countries with 2 different recorders and sound equipment. One set of sound rushes syncs perfectly in phase, the other set doesn't. So I'm just going to show you this location here. What we've got here is the guide track from Media Composer. Then we've got the first AEF track, and then we've got our first conformed track that we just expanded in Pro Tools. Now as we can see here, the AEF syncs perfectly with the guide track, but our conform doesn't. It's just a bit less than half a frame out of sync. If I spot to our second marker, here everything is perfectly in sync. So we'll pop back to the first marker. We'll just have a look what's going on here. I'll just copy down this clip and expand it all the way to the head. We'll zoom in and we'll see that the WAV file doesn't actually start on a frame edge. I've got grids set to one frame. If I happen to copy that down to the next track and spot it to a frame edge, I'll just zap up to marker 1. I've just nudged it down a frame. We see now that it's perfectly in sync. Now the problem here is that this particular location recorder doesn't start its recordings on a frame edge, whereas the other recorder does. And what happens is when this media gets loaded into Media Composer, or I would have thought any picture editing system, the picture editing system only knows about frames, so it will nudge this location file up to a frame out of sync. And so it actually looks like the AEF is in sync because you take the guide track as being your sync reference. But what has actually happened here is when you expand these tracks in Pro Tools, and because Pro Tools knows about samples, it'll conform that file exactly where it needs to go, and that happens to be out of sync with what has come from Media Composer. So it's up to you what you do in this particular situation, if you phase sync everything back to that guide track, or you leave the conform where it is and create maybe a new guide track as your new sync reference. Now with Media Composer version 8 and above, there's a new preference that will overcome this problem. On the Input Settings Audio tab, there's a checkbox called Subframe Alignment to broadcast WAV start time. Now if that is checked before any rushes are loaded, then Media Composer will pad any WAV files that are imported that don't start on a frame edge, and therefore when a conform is done in Pro Tools or any conforming system, everything will phase perfectly. Now if you're wondering which recorder records on frame edges and which ones don't, I can tell you here the files that sync up perfectly are recordings made with Sound Devices recorders. And what I can do is we'll just pop back here to EdiLoad, and here we can double click in our Match Role Names window. We can see here the metadata that EdiLoad extracts out of the WAV file, and we also see the originator, which tells us that this was recorded on a Sound Devices recorder. The other WAV files which were recorded in a different country were recorded on an Niagara 6, and I've also seen files recorded on Divas that don't sync up as well. And the interesting thing about Sound Devices recorders, which I think is just genius, is that it actually starts its recordings on a second, or the first frame in a second, so that if a project needs to change frame rates without changing speed, I expect, it'll actually still be in sync. So hopefully that helps some of you if you see that particular problem, so at least you know why it's been caused and how you can hopefully get around that in future. So that completes our demonstration of showing you how to conform your location WAV files with EdiLoad and Pro Tools. Don't forget, EdiLoad also has an extensive user guide which can be accessed from the EdiLoad help menu. So thanks for watching this video, and if you haven't tried out EdiLoad for yourself, either on Mac OS or Windows, just head to the download page of our website. Once the app is installed, just run it and click Try to activate a trial license. And if you have any questions or feedback regarding this video, feel free to leave a comment on our blog post where this video is hosted.